Assalamu alaikum, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My name is Niamh Maria Conlon, the wife of Mohammed Hajib, a detainee in Salé 2, Morocco. I would like to speak a little about the wrongful imprisonment of my husband. Mohammed is a dual Moroccan-German citizen, and we have 3 young children. Omar Khattab, 6 years old, Ubaida Ahmed, 4 years old, and Safia, 2 years old. On the 18th of February 2010, Mohammed was kidnapped departing from a flight from Frankfurt to Casablanca. He was handcuffed and bundled into a vehicle and brought to a nearby prison in Casablanca. There he was interrogated, beaten and tortured. 2 weeks later he was forced to sign a confession which he was not allowed to read. On the 1st of March 2010, Mohammed was transported from Casa to Salé. In Salé he was met by a representative of the German consulate Rabat, who showed him a document which they had received from the German consulate in Pakistan, stating that as far as they were informed by the Pakistani authorities, Mohammed was arrested in Pakistan merely due to his visa. However, to our dismay, Mohammed was imprisoned in Salé, Morocco. On the 10th of May 2010, Mohammed began a hunger strike in protest of his innocence. On the 24th of June, he was brought to court on a stretcher due to the fact that he was on his 46th day of hunger strike. He was too weak to walk. He was charged with financing terrorism and being a member of a terrorist group and sentenced to a horrifying 10 years in prison, although there was no evidence to link him to any terrorist group or activities. On the 25th of February 2011, Mohammed climbed up on the wall of Salé 1, threatening to burn himself alive if he and the other detainees were not released. On the 26th of February, after negotiations with Moroccan officials, Mohammed descended from the wall. He was ensured that improvements would be made to the living conditions of the detainees. For example, they were granted free movement within the prison grounds, including the roof. In March 2011, the detainees peacefully protested, demanding that their cases be reviewed. On the 25th of March, an agreement between Moroccan authorities and detainees was signed. There were 3 terms of this agreement. Number 1, all prisoners awaiting trial will be given a court date within a month. Number 2, transfer of prisoners from Salé 1 will be impossible until their release. And number 3, all prisoners will be released before or on the next Eid celebration. Unfortunately, only a handful of prisoners were released and a handful of cases brought to court. On the 16th of May 2011, Mohammed and other detainees of Salé 1 were attacked by the prison guards. On the 17th of May, my husband sustained head injuries, and that evening he was transported to Tulal, Meknes. In Tulal, he was stripped, beaten and threatened with rape by Ahmed Boujdia, nicknamed Nega. He then attempted to commit suicide, fell unconscious, was brought to hospital and from there transported to Salé 2. On his arrival in Salé 2, he was handcuffed, thrown to the floor and badly beaten by Yunus Bouazizi. During his first few days in Salé, he was removed from his cell and beaten constantly by Driss Molled. He was placed in solitary confinement, his beard and his hair shaved, and remained handcuffed for the following 50 days, 4 of which he spent with his legs shackled and his hands tied behind his back. His skin was cut down to the bone as a result of the handcuffs. He remained in dirty clothing for nearly 2 months. In June 2011, a representative of the German consulate Rabat visited Mohammed and reported on his despicable appearance and poor state of health. Since the consulate reported on the state of Mohammed, they have not been given permission to visit Mohammed. An old refrigerator was installed in Mohammed's cell, one which he describes as having a motor like a train. This was undoubtedly installed in order to drive him insane, and he suffered to a great extent from sleep deprivation. On complaining about the refrigerator, he was removed from his cell, his hands and feet tied, knocked to the floor and badly beaten by Al-Adimi, the vice-director of Salé 2. We visited Mohammed a few days after the beating. Our son Omar was with us. Mohammed was very quiet, like someone in shock. His face was badly bruised. Since this day, the 10th of August 2011, until the 14th of March 2010, Omar refused to visit his father and constantly got upset when I asked him to do so, saying it made him far too sad to see his father behind the screens and not being able to hug and kiss him. On the 26th of October, Mohammed was once again handcuffed, removed from his cell and beaten. He sustained injuries to his ear, nose, and his face was badly bruised by Yunus Bouazizi, Al-Adhimi, Fouad Haji and Fouad Zimrani. He was also forced to sign blank pieces of paper. On the 9th of January, Mohammed's 10-year sentence was alhamdulillah reduced to 5 years. For this appeal, Mohammed's lawyer managed to obtain a letter from the German Foreign Ministry in Berlin stating that his arrest in Pakistan was not in relation to terrorist involvement. Lawyers, Mohammed's family and especially Mohammed, however, were expecting him to be acquitted. We have all been greatly affected by Mohammed's imprisonment. Our lives have been turned upside down. My eldest son Omar, who prior to his father's detention was a very outgoing young boy, has become agitated. He prefers to stay at home. He's quiet, he's insecure, always asking me when I leave our home if I'm going to return. Safia doesn't know her father. He has been in prison since she was born. She looks at him as if he were a stranger. The Moroccan authorities stated that Mohammed was and is of no national security threat to the country. The Pakistani authorities dismissed any possibility that Mohammed was involved in any terrorist group or activities. Mohammed never had any problems in Germany, so why was my husband Mohammed Hajib sentenced to a horrifying 10 years in prison? My husband's story, however, is one of so many. As recently as July 2011, one inmate, Abdullah Manfa' in Tulal Meknes, was reciting the Quran in a loud voice. He was then removed from his cell and beaten. The detainees began to protest against the beating by shouting from their cells and demanding an end to the aggression. One of the protesters, Adil Ferdawi, 28 years old, was then taken from his cell on the orders of a prison guard, Ahmed Boujdia. He then ordered guards to beat Adil across the head with the baton. He was then stripped naked, dragged along the floor by his beard. He eventually fell unconscious. The other detainees then heard Ahmed Boujdia instructing the guards to molest Adil and rape him. After these despicable actions, Adil's hands and feet were tied. Another 3 inmates, Abdullah al-Manfa', Yusuf al-Qudri, 22 years old, and Abdul Samad Lamsimi, 33 years old, were put through the same ordeal. They were then bundled into a vehicle while being beaten and taken to an unknown location for a week. Yusuf al-Qudri, during his court hearing regarding the events of May 2011 in Saleh 1, explained how he was severely beaten, stripped naked and molested. This was then followed by the prison guards raping him using their batons. Another brother, Hisham Rabja, spent 3.5 years in the secret detention centre in Tamera. 3.5 years subjected to physical and mental abuse. 3.5 years of suffering without having been charged with a crime. He is now in prison in Saleh 2 and is still being beaten and is still awaiting his trial. Whatever happened to innocent until proven guilty? The list of those who have been abused in Morocco is unendless. Omar Amrani, Bush the Sheriff, Mohammed Hajib, Hassan Khattab, Saeed Boulifa, Yunus Zari, to name but a few. It is, however, not only pious men who have been victims of the so-called war on terror. Many Muslim women have also been unjustly detained. Sister Hasna Moussaid from Casablanca was arrested and spent 1 year and 8 months being transferred from prisons in Casa, Saleh and Kenitra. She gave birth to a baby girl whilst in prison and lived with her daughter Amal in appalling conditions. She was placed in a mixed wing. It was dirty, loud, and with constant singing and dancing. On several occasions she was beaten by a prison guard. Fatiha Hassani, also known as Adam, spent 9 months in Tamera, also in disturbing conditions, as did a sister named Fuzia Uzuga. Dr. Doha Abu Thabit is still serving time in prison. The wives and children of the detainees are suffering as a result of the detention of their loved ones. Many families of the detainees have been forced to leave their homes, unable to pay their rent. My husband told me of some brothers in Saleh 1 who used to collect prison food, which other brothers did not want, for example, cans of tuna, bread, and give it to their wives on visiting day in order for them to feed their children, and others in order to sell the food to pay their bills. Many of the families cannot pay for medication for their sick children. There is one sister who lives in a 3-metre by 3-metre room with her 6 children. Another sister begs outside a mosque every day to feed her children. The family of a detainee, Bush the sheriff, used to eat from the rubbish dumps. They were left with no other choice. They were desperate and as a result became very ill. The years passed, the detainees are still in prison, their wives and children going hungry and homeless. My idyllic view of Morocco has been shattered since my husband Mohammed Hajib was kidnapped, beaten and tortured, since I have learned of the horrifying stories of men, women and even children who have suffered and are still suffering as a result of the so-called war on terror. I once regarded Morocco as a beautiful country, one in which Muslims practiced their religion without fear of being oppressed or targeted. How ignorant was I! The injustice against pious Muslims and the lack of, or should I say, the non-existence of basic human rights is phenomenal. The extent to which families of detainees are being collectively punished is very saddening. The Moroccan authorities refuse to take responsibility for kidnapping, abuse, torture, even rape, and compensate those who have been wrongly imprisoned. As I speak, some brothers who have been on hunger strike since the 9th of April are in a critical condition in hospital. They began their hunger strike as a result of the ongoing beating, the appalling living conditions, demanding that the agreement signed ensuring the release of the prisoners on the 25th of March 2011 between Moroccan officials and detainees be honoured, and due to the fact that even after being attacked, tortured and some raped, after the events of the 16th and 17th of May, they were brought to court and their sentences were increased. Some of the brothers, for example, Adil El-Fardawi and Yusuf Al-Khudri, have Mohammed Hajib, Noureddin Nfa, also known as Abu Muad, Muad Raidhi, Hisham Maish, and Mohammed Shedli. For the past few days, Adil and Yusuf have refused to drink water, bearing in mind that it is approximately 35 degrees in Morocco at the moment. Both Adil and Yusuf are both unable to move their arms and legs. Yesterday, some of the brothers were taken to hospital. Hisham Maish lost consciousness. They are all said to be in critical condition. Don't forget these brothers in your prayers. May Allah hasten the release of the detainees in Morocco and all Muslim prisoners around the world. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mohammed Hajib. I'm 6 years old. My dad, Mohammed Hajib, is a prisoner in Saleh, Morocco. He was kidnapped from Casablanca airport in 2010. I waited with my grandparents at the airport for him to arrive. I remember crying lads when nuts come out of the airport to see me. They put him in prison for 10 years, even though he did nothing, and they don't have anything against him. My dad is innocent. I miss him lots. I miss going to the masjid with him. I miss playing football with him. I miss everything. I want him to come home. It's not fair. I'm so sad since my dad was taken away from me. My dad, Mohammed Hajib, has to be released. And the injustice, my dad has done nothing. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Ubaida Ahmed Hajib. I'm 4 years old. I miss my dad, Mohammed Hajib. I want him to come home. Assalamu alaikum.